Hello there, and welcome to my ranking of every new album that I listened to throughout 2024. In this video, I'm going to be giving my thoughts on all 55 new album releases I listened to last year, from some of my favorite artists of all time, and from some artists I found myself trying out for the first time. After a somewhat underwhelming 2023, in my opinion, 2024 just might have been the strongest year for music of the 2020s so far. It's that or 2021, it was a fantastic year either way. So the way this is going to work is that entries 55 through 26 are all going to be sort of speed-rounded, and then I'll actually talk about the top 25 in some amount of depth. I was originally going to give roughly equal length segments to every single album here, but as I was writing that script, I realized that a video of that nature very likely would have gone over 2 hours, and I don't really plan on making a video of that size until my inevitable Violet Evergarden series retrospective, which will honestly probably end up running for 3. But if you find yourself wishing at any point that I went into more depth on any of these records, I actually already have. My script for the top 25 here consists entirely of condensed versions of much longer reviews that I wrote for my music board account, and I'll be providing links to my reviews for all 55 of these albums in the description below. Also, keep in mind that I don't dislike any of the albums I'm going to talk about here. I didn't discover a single bad record last year, they're all at least okay in my opinion. But without further ado, let's talk about some music. At number 55, we have Found Heaven by Conan Gray. It's a decent enough collection of 80s revivalist synth pop, but it's doing absolutely nothing new with this sound, and some decent throwback synth pop is honestly pretty disappointing following up an album like Super 8, which brought his sound into several interesting new directions. Here's hoping his fourth album can pick up where that one left off, and this album can simply be remembered as an odd detour. At number 54, we have Lonesome High by Dear Rouge. This band's refusal to evolve frustrates me. They're very obviously talented musicians, and Danielle has such a great voice. But the only real thing that's changed about them since 2018 is that they've become progressively less synthy. And that's honestly a downgrade, because their synthiest album to date, Phases, is their best by far. This is still a well-made collection of energetic rock tunes at the end of the day, but there's just nothing that stands out about it. At number 53, we have Nel Nome del Codis by Keygen Church. In 2 words, this album is fake metal. Crushing guitars, gothic organs, incredibly rapid drumming, but it's all instrumentation from a computer. Purely synthetic. While this does lead to a unique sound for the record, I have never heard anything else quite like it. The issue is that all these songs sound borderline identical. If you've heard one track from this record, you've heard them all, so it's kind of an exhausting album experience in spite of its definite coolness. At number 52, we have Gravity Falls Lo-Fi by Brad Breek. Pieces of the Gravity Falls score remade from the ground up as chill lo-fi, released in tandem last year with the Most of it is very atmospheric and super nostalgic as a longtime fan of the series, but some of it is also pretty boring, and the fact that none of these compositions are technically new prevents me from being able to put it any higher. I still love to see the franchise getting new content like this though. Makes me very happy. At number 51, we have Shin Bangumi by Ginger Root. While definitely not to the same degree as that fake metal record, this is yet another project with a very cool sound that's just way too samey for its own good. The opener, No Problems, goes super hard and introduces the album's quaint, lo-fi alt-pop aesthetic very effectively, but then nothing else afterwards comes anywhere close to topping it, leading to a project that's overall just fine. Again, very cool sound to this record, I just wish it did more with it. At number 50, we have Grief Chapter by Mother Mother. This is an album that I describe as being less than the sum of its parts. These songs are mostly a great time individually, but they're a bit repetitive when played in sequence, and the frequently overblown approach to instrumentation only serves to make that repetition feel even more grating. Its best song, though, Forever, is sincerely one of my top 15 favorites of the year, disproportionately stunning when compared to the rest of these solid tracks. At number 49, we have Tow Truck Jesus by Superfan. This is a pretty alright debut album for the most part. Gone is the snappy alt-pop of his initial EPs, and in its place is a very raw and intentionally messy sort of singer-songwriter rock-ish record. Sometimes the messiness works for me, other times it's just not for me, but the album still presents a very distinct sonic identity, as well as a strong lyrical identity with its engaging writing that frequently touches upon the experiences of living as a trans person, something which just got a whole hell of a lot harder for one country in particular. At number 48, we have the Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur Season 2 soundtrack by various artists. While absolutely a step down from the first season's tracks, this is still a pretty good time overall. Where Season 1's collection felt shockingly sleek given what you'd typically expect from a show of this nature, Season 2's collection does feel a tad more Disney Channel-ish at times, but still a pretty significant cut above anything you'd normally expect from this network. It's still got bangers. At number 47, we have Cowboy Carter by Beyonce. This is the first album I've ever heard from her, because the prospect of an artist artist like her tackling country was simply too intriguing to pass up. And to make a really long story short, whenever the project is actually being a country record, it's pretty darn good, but whenever it's genre blending or just not being country at all, it's a mixed bag. An overly long mess full of some really cool and genuinely terrible ideas, but overall, it still works more than it doesn't. I particularly recommend reading my music board review for this one. I go very in-depth there. At number 46, we have Finding a Home on the Edges by Ben Blowett. This album is 100% pianos and absolutely nothing else. It's very pleasant and very pretty. The piano has always been my favorite instrument to listen to in sonic isolation, so it's no wonder I enjoyed this. At number 45, we have Ritual by John Hopkins, an extremely immersive ambient electronic album that's essentially just one continuous 40-minute song that's been split into tracks sort of arbitrarily. It's very aesthetically lush and surprisingly never boring in spite of its super slow progression. It's a cool experience. At number 44, we have The Tortured Poets Department by Taylor Swift. It doesn't offer up much in the way of forward artistic progression for her sound and generally feels like a bit of a hodgepodge, but I still quite enjoyed most of these tracks and absolutely consider it an improvement over Midnight's. I just hope Taylor's next album sports a more distinct musical identity. That Florence and the Machine feature was pretty stellar though. At number 43, we have Eye to the Ear by Cosmo Sheldrake, one of the most charmingly strange and beautifully one-of-a-kind records of the year, just not in a way that particularly enthralls me personally. Usually when I come across a record this completely unique, I end up falling in love with it, but something about this one only keeps me at the level of simply liking it. A very cool Baroque experience nonetheless. At number 42, we have the Minecraft Tricky Trails soundtrack by Aaron Cheroff, Kumi Tenioka, and Lena Rain. These newer Minecraft scores are obviously never going to reach the same heights as C418's days with the franchise, but you can still always rely on them for some very pretty and very atmospheric compositions. Also, among these primarily very low-key pieces of background music, they include the music disc Precipice, which is genuinely one of the most thrillingly epic songs of the entire year. It's super out of place, but I'm absolutely glad it's there. It's wonderful. At number 41, we have Persona by Half Alive, a very enjoyable collection of breezily fun alt-pop tracks. It's quite a ways away from the genuine excellence of their debut back in 2019, but it's absolutely an improvement over their relatively bloated 2022 sophomore effort. It's nothing super unique, but it's all still very well executed. Automatic specifically might be their single most badass song to date. At number 40, we have The Anthology by Taylor Swift. Yes, I'm counting this one separately. It's basically just diet folklore / Evermore, but hey, those are my favorite Taylor albums. So even if this doesn't live up to those projects, I'm never gonna complain about more music from Taylor in that vein. She does it in a very appealing way. At number 39, we have Bad Cameo by James Blake and Lil Yachty. Hands down, the single most vibey album of the year. The songwriting may be boring at times and it's all perhaps a bit too samey, but the atmosphere here is always on point and the highlights like Transport Me and In Grey are absolutely transcendent. An inconsistent but still pretty beautiful project. At number 38, we have Bando Stone and the New World by Childish Gambino. This is my first time listening to one of Donald Glover's records, and I quite like what I'm hearing here. It's undoubtedly super scattershot, but all these disparate sounds, styles, and experiments end up working shockingly well together. Far from perfectly, but still very well. At number 37, we have I Love You So Fucking Much by Glass Animals. Their weakest album to date, if you ask me, but still a very solid collection of tracks. I certainly hope that this shift to a much more mainstream songwriting style isn't a permanent change for the band, but I still think they occupy that pop style quite well here. It's got some awesome highlights, and I really love the interstellar sense of atmosphere it's all shooting for. At number 36, we have Ohio Players by the Black Keys, their best album since 2014's Turn Blue. It's not doing anything new with their sound, other than throwing in some bizarrely well-executed rap features here and there, but it's still exploring this familiar territory in a much more consistently engaging way than the band's previous couple of records. It's some very straightforward fun. At number 35, we have The Phantom 5 by AWOL Nation. Also an album that's genuinely quite fun in spite of treading zero new territory for its artist. I definitely wish the supposedly final AWOL album could have gone out with a more distinct bang, but they still offer up some truly excellent bangers here. It's a good time, especially that feature from Del the Funky Homo Sapien. At number 34, we have Cutouts by The Smile. Handily the weakest of the band's 2 records last year, but it's still a Tom York project, so there's obviously tons of quality material to be found. I'm especially in love with the hypnotically energetic Zero Sum, but their album from earlier in the year simply felt way more cohesive and overall fulfilling. We'll get to it later. At number 33, we have the Sound Euphonium Season 3 score by Akito Matsuda, which is easily the lowest rated project on this list that also contains one of my top 10 favorite songs of the year. This season's concert piece, Hitotsu no Uta, is unsurprisingly stunning and worthy of complete adoration. This anime has never been one to sport particularly impressive background music, but I still find the show's sound to be very, very charming, and the pieces actually performed by the show's characters are all wonderful. At number 32, we have The New Sound by Jordi Griep. This is an album which I think I admire more than I actively like. I still like it a lot, it's thoroughly original, and its highlights are among some of my favorite songs of the year, but I kinda get the sense that it's a masterpiece which my personal tastes just aren't fully capable of taking in all the way. To phrase it another way, it's just a bit much for me. Still an enjoyable experience, but I definitely enjoyed the likes of Hellfire and Cavalcade more. At number 31, we have the Look Back original score by Haruko Nakamura. This was my favorite film of the year, and that was thanks in no small part to its deeply, deeply beautiful soundtrack. It's way too short and simplistic for me to realistically place it any higher than this, but what's here is still so truly lovely and emotionally evocative. At number 30, we have Loom by Imagine Dragons, a very refreshing bounce back after the overly long mess that was the band's previous album. It definitely feels a bit scant in terms of its length, but what's here still makes for some very colorful, decently diverse, and super consistently fun alt-pop. Not one of their best, but still quite a nice listen. At number 29, we have Funeral for Justice by Umdo Makhtar. Probably not saying that right. This album marks my first proper experience with African rock music, and I had a really great time with it. While very aesthetically similar to any average rock band from the West, it's incredibly distinct from the West in terms of both rhythm and melody. A very cool first dip into this side of the rock world that I definitely intend to explore further. At number 28, we have the Arcane Season 2 soundtrack by various artists. Just like the season from which it originates, this collection is nowhere near as consistently quality as its predecessor, but the high points here are still pretty insanely good, and it's a very enjoyable experience overall. At number 27, we have Patterns in Repeat by Laura Marling, a very endearing and ethereally pleasant record dedicated primarily to her currently very young daughter. It captures a level of intimacy that almost feels wrong for us the listeners to be privy to. Such a beautiful album. At number 26, we have Welcome to the Plains by Wyatt Flores, which is potentially the best country debut I've ever heard. All of my current favorite country artists don't really have discographies that I think started off... Hi.
Sorry. Sorry I interrupted your recording. I didn't realize you...
All of my current favorite country musicians don't really have discographies that I think started off in a particularly notable way, but Wyatt really hit the ground running with this one. The melodies are memorable, the emotions are varied, and the instrumentation is so consistently lush. Really, really liked this one. At number 25, we have Prelude to Ecstasy by The Last Dinner Party. So yeah, from here on out, these reviews will become a little bit lengthier, but still decidedly shorter than the music board reviews I'm linking in the description. I should also mention that this record here is the February pick in my Spontaneous Discoveries initiative. A personal initiative where I look back at the end of every month and choose one album to listen to from an artist I don't know much about or are completely unfamiliar with. This initiative also includes these albums I've already mentioned, as well as a few more yet to come. But yeah, this thing was pretty fantastic as far as debut records go. It's got consistently passionate performances, both vocally and instrumentally, lush production that stands out without ever needing to feel flashy, and a pretty solid amount of emotional variety, even if I would have liked perhaps a bit more musical variety. It can feel a tad samey at times, and there were some tracks near the end that simply didn't engage me all that much, but the highlights here really are excellent, and I have no doubt this band will continue to produce excellent albums. Said highlights include the very emotionally moving Beautiful Boy, the very Florence and the Machine-esque Feminine Urge, and so many energetic bops like Burn Alive, Sinner, and Nothing Matters. Honestly, the whole album feels pretty Florence-inspired, which is never a bad thing. Can't wait to see what they do next. At number 24, we have Flight B741 by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. 2024 marks the year I finally binged through this band's entire massive discography. This, their 26th album in 12 years, is yet another very solid and stylistically distinct change of pace for Australia's legendary genre chameleons. The past album, which it most strongly resembles, would definitely be 2019's Fishing for Fishies, just with noticeably scuzzier production, a complete lack of synths, and a conscious effort to make it sound more like something from the American South. The result is a record which may be rather lacking in terms of feeling aesthetically dynamic, but that still explores this very focused sound palette in a number of incredibly fun ways. There are moments that take things a little slower, like Antarctica or Mirage City, some very energetically silly tracks such as Field of Vision and Hog Calling Contest, and it also contains what just might be one of my top 10 favorite songs from King Gizzard, the wonderfully badass blast of swagger that is La Risque. Overall, I definitely wouldn't consider this to be one of the band's absolute best. I'd put it more near the middle of my discography ranking, but that's not at all to imply it's disappointing. I certainly wish there was a bit more variety to it, but at the same time, I do really enjoy this aesthetic and how consistently good the band is at playing around in it. Very fun album. At number 23, we have And Now I'm Just Gnashing My Teeth by the Barbarians of California. AWOL Nation might be throwing in the towel, but in the same year as that supposedly final project, 60% of its members plus one new guy have re-emerged in the form of a band that's here to give us an extremely solid collection of post-hardcore ragers. Even though I've always had difficulty enjoying screamed vocals in music, Aaron Bruno of AWOL Nation has consistently been the most significant exception to that rule. His screams seemingly always work for me, and in a way, this record has seriously expanded my horizons by being the first album I've ever listened to where the majority of the vocals are screamed. Aaron just makes it work. The first half here is a non-stop escalation of thrillingly heavy excellence. The Library makes for such a thunderously fun and grippingly grandiose opener, and Bazooka stands out mostly on account of its incredibly engaging tempo changes all throughout. But my number one favorite song on the record would have to be Dopamine Prophecy, and that's because it represents all the core qualities of this album operating at peak performance level. Crisply produced and wonderfully aggressive guitar work, some of Aaron's most viscerally epic screams to date, and just such an invigoratingly fun sense of energy. The record's second half isn't quite as consistent, and the project doesn't really offer up much in the way of variety, but the sheer brevity of it prevents that sameness from being an actual issue, and the whole thing is just so energetically performed, flawlessly mixed, and above all else, super fun. At number 22, we have Dayglow by Dayglow. I've never been a huge fan of his music up to this point. His first album was pretty alright, his second album was quite solidly fun, and his third album was utterly bland and forgettable outside of its genuinely brilliant opener. But now here we are with his fourth album, an excellent choice of record to be presented as his self-titled because it really does feel like he's redefined himself here. His music so far has largely been defined by generally quite plucky, synthy soundscapes. Not 100% synthetic, obviously, there were plucky guitars there as well, but the clear focus on synth eventually led to an aesthetic that had lost most of its charm by the time of that third album, which makes this album's hard shift into lush guitar-driven pop rock so damn refreshing. It's such a massive Dayglow up. I love that he was able to take on this new sound palette while still maintaining the same sense of charmingly energetic optimism which has always defined his songwriting. This project absolutely still feels like Dayglow, but through this newfound focus on guitars, its Dayglow evolved into his as-of-yet best self. I've got no problem with synth-driven music, as should become increasingly obvious throughout the video, but this aesthetic shift suits him so well. Everything about this album feels so much more weighty than any of those past records, and we have this far more organic instrumental approach to thank for that. Highlights for me include the immediately infectious Cocoon, the surprisingly unhinged Nothing Ever Does, as well as Broken Bone, which made for such a cathartic closer. At number 21, we have What Happened to the Heart by Aurora. The June pick from my Spontaneous Discoveries initiative, this marks the first full album experience I've ever had with Aurora. I've heard various random songs from throughout her discography over the years, and I've always loved how she can kinda give this uniquely Scandinavian spin to whatever genre she may be tackling. And I'm pleased to report that this record here is filled to the brim with that same Scandinavian charm. You've got wonderful pop-leaning moments like Your Blood and Do You Feel, some truly fascinating electronic soundscapes from the likes of My Name and Starvation, and hands down one of the coolest rock songs of the year on The Blade. I also adore how truly Viking A Soul With No King sounds. I feel like it's begging to have a Vinland Saga AMV made out of it or something. My only real problem here is that the record is much too long. It has an overabundance of these mostly boring, slower, quieter moments which majorly impede the engaging sense of momentum that the project feels like it's trying to build up. Beyond that though, the record is still deeply atmospheric, flawlessly produced, very impressively cohesive given the sheer amount of musical styles present, and it offers up so many insanely good highlights. If it had condensed its 16-song tracklist into only its 10 or so best songs, then it genuinely may have made my top 5, but it's still very cool as is. At number 20, we have Moon Music by Coldplay. The rollout for this 10th album of theirs had me expecting something that was at least a slight improvement over their previous and so far weakest record, Music of the Spheres, but what we got actually turned out to be a significant improvement. Not only do I like this record more than Music of the Spheres, I like it more than 2019's Everyday Life, and at least roughly on the same level as 2015's A Head Full of Dreams. It's so nice to finally get a genuine uptick in this discography after the slight downwards trajectory they've been on since I guess 2008. Moon Music is still quite a ways away from being one of their very best. I severely doubt the band will ever reach the heights of these three ever again, but this is still such a well-made and engagingly varied pop record. Highlights for me include I Am a Mountain, which delights as something of a throwback to their Viva era, Eterna, which exists on the complete opposite end of the spectrum as some super well-executed straight-up EDM, as well as Alien Hits Alien Radio, which is genuinely the single most abstract thing that the band has ever released, and it's great. On the whole, this really does feel like a new and improved take on Music of the Spheres. It's got the same glossy aesthetics and wide sense of variety as that previous record, but said aesthetics sound way more sonically vivid to me, the album's approach to interstellar atmosphere feels much more consistently immersive, and the relatively experimental moments here go over significantly better than they tended to on that last project. I also like that the band feels quite a bit more present here. There are obviously still synths aplenty, but I feel like the real instrumentation was given the spotlight far more frequently here than last time. Literally, the only way in which Music of the Spheres surpasses this album is in its ending, because Coloratura is one of the greatest masterpieces of their entire discography, and One World is honestly the weakest song here. But overall, Moon Music is super well paced, constantly bright and uplifting, and just very consistently quality. At number 19, we have Empathogen by Willow. This album came to me at the recommendation of a friend and is my first proper experience with Miss Smith's music. It travels somewhere in a nebulous space between alt-pop and jazz, which makes for such a consistently fun musical fusion all throughout. It's not a record that I can particularly say blew me away or anything, but I still had such a great time with it. The production is perfectly crisp and impactful, Willow herself gives what are easily some of the most expressive vocal performances of the year, and pretty much all the full songs here go incredibly hard. It's wild to see how far she's come since the days of novelty bullshit like Whip My Hair. She's completely unrecognizable by this point, and probably the most musically talented person in her family. I specified full songs a second ago because my most significant problem with this record is its several tracks which don't even reach the 2-minute mark. Micro songs like No Words, Down, and Ancient Girl break up the track list in a way that makes the flow of things feel kinda disjointed. But like I said, the full-length songs are all wonderful. False Self has such vividly detailed production while also presenting a truly riveting sense of contrast between its verses and choruses. Pain for Fun features an incredibly well-utilized guest performance from St. Vincent, with whom Willow has stellar vocal chemistry, and Symptom of Life is simply one of the best songs of the entire year. Lushly produced drums and pianos, a consistently stunning vocal performance, an utterly hypnotic and extremely fun chorus. It's such a beautiful banger. Very good album on the whole. At number 15, we have Vicious Creature by Lauren Mayberry. While I don't really have a definitive list laid out at the moment, Churches are a synth-pop group that I've often considered to be one of my top 10 favorite artists of all time. So of course I was excited to see what their frontwoman would create by her lonesome. The result is a project that's undeniably messy, but mostly still a very enjoyable and impressively diverse experience. You've got songs like Crocodile Tears and Change Shapes, which feel like callbacks to older eras of pop music, very tender and emotionally vulnerable ballads such as Anywhere But Dancing and Oh Mother, bangers like Sorry Etc. and Punch Drunk which pull off more chaotic soundscapes pretty darn well, and thrillingly grandiose pieces like Something in the Air and Sunday Best which definitely feel the most reminiscent of Lauren's work with Churches. The album certainly isn't without its sloppier moments, but more so than that being a significant issue for me, I just really appreciate the sheer versatility on display. What Lauren is going for here feels completely distinct from what she does with her band, and I'm very happy to hear that. I may not enjoy it quite as much as any of that band's main 4 projects, but I still love the creativity, her voice is just as stunning as ever, and the highlights here definitely rank among some of my favorite tracks of the year. Even the lowlights never stoop any lower than still being pretty decent. Can't wait to see what she does next. At number 17, we have Songs of a Lost World by The Cure. The November pick from my Spontaneous Discoveries initiative. That makes this my first time ever listening to this iconic band, It's not my first experience with Robert Smith, though. I've grown to appreciate his unique vocal style through his features on songs by Gorillaz, Crystal Castles, and Churches, funnily enough. But I'm happy to report that my first proper exposure to this band made for a very enjoyable first impression. The production and overall mixing could definitely be a bit stronger, but the album still strikes a wonderfully desolate sense of atmosphere. The level of quality is extremely consistent with no real duds, and Robert Smith gives awesome vocal performances all throughout. Highlights for me include the immersive grand opener Alone, the thrilling blends of grimy bass and plucky synth on the incredibly badass Drone No Drone, the insanely catchy and surprisingly bouncy A Fragile Thing, and chiefly among all, the very fittingly named closer, End Song. I really admire how it's able to run as purely instrumental for over half of its 10-minute runtime without ever becoming boring. The instrumentation here works so damn effectively because it's got such a perfectly paced sense of slow escalation that continuously adds more and more musical layers at a very satisfying rate. Very cool album. At number 16, we have Loss of Life by MGMT. While this certainly ain't the band's best record, it's still an incredibly worthy addition to their discography, and it seriously stands out in one particular way. That particular way being an emotional palette that feels quite new for them. While certainly not without exception, most of their material up to this point tended to operate in the realms of cynicism, darkness, or emotional neutrality/abstraction. This project, however, deals heavily in bleeding heart sincerity and genuine hopefulness most of the time. It brings a sense of beauty and soul to the band's sound that they've never before had in such full force like this, and it's great. There are a handful of forgettable moments here and there, in the second half especially, but the project mostly consists of bangers like Mother Nature and Bubblegum Dog, and stunningly emotional slow builds like Dancing in Babylon, Nothing Changes, and my personal favorite, People in the Streets. That one's just so damn lush and emotionally moving all throughout. Very good album. Also, my mother's favorite album of the year, fun fact, that or the James Blake Lil Yachty album I talked about earlier. At number 15, we have El Viejo by Corb Lund. This marks the man's 10th album of original material, and it's pretty wild that he's still giving us some of his very best so late into his career. This record features consistently excellent performances from both Corb and everyone in his band, and some truly wonderful storytelling with a wide variety of topics that only further instills Lund as being my personal favorite lyricist of all time. But what impressed me most here is that they managed to pull off a fully acoustic album without it ever once becoming boring. I tend to associate acoustic albums with soundscapes that feel very basic and barren or just plain tedious, but this album has so much instrumental variety and attention to detail that I didn't even notice it was acoustic at first. It feels just as lush and full as any of his regular albums. Highlights for me include the raucously fun Redneck Rehab, the wonderfully sly When the Game Gets Hot, and especially It Takes Practice, which is easily one of his most fascinatingly philosophical songs to date. Not quite the best country album of the year, but certainly up there. At number 14, we have Neon Pill by Cage the Elephant. After such a long hiatus and somewhat bland lead single, I was kind of worried going into this record that the band had potentially lost their edge. But as I listened to these songs more and more throughout 2024, I became more convinced that it's genuinely one of the very best projects they've ever released. It feels like a very natural evolution of the general soundscape from their previous record, Social Cues. A lot more glossy and shimmery than anything they've previously released, but it maintains more than enough rock edge in both its energy and aesthetics that it never even remotely approaches the realm of soullessness or feeling sanded down. It's super well paced, decently atmospheric, and it sports a pretty wide variety of highlights as well, whether it be more classic Cage leaning tracks like Hi-Fi or Shy Eyes, or the more pop leaning Rainbow or the gorgeously lush Float into the Sky. There are so many great songs to enjoy here. I know a lot of people are saying they fell off with this record, but it honestly might be my second favorite of their entire catalog, behind only the unbeatable masterpiece that is Melophobia. At number 13, we have A Lonely Sinner by Sam LRC, or Sam Lurk, I don't really know how you pronounce it. This album came to me at the recommendation of a friend, and while I'm not very familiar with post-rock as an overall genre, I'm really glad I checked this thing out because it has a lot to offer. Atmosphere that calls upon both the coziness and desolation of winter, some incredibly inventive uses of samples all throughout, and an ever-present sense of emotional vulnerability that it manages to exude quite powerfully even with very minimal lyricism. There are plenty of great songs here, but I must specifically highlight one by the name of Storage, because even though this project is a good distance away from the top of my list, Storage is undoubtedly my #1 favorite song of 2024. It's this masterpiece musical odyssey that functions intertextually with an old animated film from the 70s called Ringing Bell. It samples dialogue from the film as a way of emotionally amplifying and mirroring its narrative. Its genre fluctuates wildly between things like heavy metal and chill ambient, and even in the absence of any sung lyricism, it's one of the most emotionally devastating pieces of art I've ever borne witness to. Very good album overall, but if you have only one takeaway from this entire video, it's go listen to Storage. It's absolutely unreal. At number 12, we have Hit Me Hard and Soft by Billie Eilish. While she's never even remotely been an artist that one could reasonably call samey, this is the first project of hers where I can truly say that variety is the name of the game. And while the results aren't always stellar, it's still an incredibly admirable approach for the record. Some of those less successful results include the bland alt-pop of Lunch or the bizarre attempted blend of vocal jazz and hyperpop on L'amour de ma vie, but there are far more hits than misses here. Birds of a Feather is a stunningly beautiful pop track. Songs like The Greatest, Bittersweet, and Blue prove Billie as being incredibly capable of writing compelling multi-phased music, and Chihiro stands tall as the single most magical song she's ever released. I love that it's literally just about Spirited Away, unambiguously. However, the core reason behind why I actually consider this to be my least favorite Billie album is because it's her least Billie Eilish project to date. Some parts of it very much feel like beautiful evolutions of her core sound, but there are other aesthetic ideas which feel almost completely new for her. While I absolutely admire the ambition and enjoy the variety that it brings to the record, to me it also feels like her somewhat moving away from the things that make her so unique. Only somewhat though, because she does most of these new styles so well that I can't even complain too much about the slightly dimmed individuality of it all. It's still a very consistently quality album with incredible production, near perfect pacing, and some truly spectacular highlights. It may not 100% be what I would have wanted from a third Billie album, but she's still one of the very best pop artists we have around nowadays. At number 11, we have Smile by Porter Robinson. The July pick from my Spontaneous Discovery initiative, what we have here is genuinely one of the most unique pop records I've ever heard. It's an album built mostly out of relatively normal pop songwriting, but it borrows heavily from aesthetics that are typically associated with straight-up electronic music and especially video game OSTs. The result is something I guess you could call electropop, but it arrives at that genre destination by completely different means than almost anything I could consider a contemporary. At least of all the music I've heard throughout my life so far, it feels like a wholly unique blend of musical elements. It strikes an excellent balance between mindless fun and heartfelt emotion, it's vividly aesthetically varied in such a distinct way, and I'm also surprised by just how much these vocals don't annoy me. On paper, I seriously feel like I should find both the way they're sung and mixed to be incredibly irritating, but they work pretty much perfectly all throughout the project. Highlights for me include the wonderfully aggressive Mona Lisa, the incredibly diverse Russian Roulette, which utilizes its 6-minute runtime beautifully, and chiefly among all, Cheerleader, which has one of the most thrillingly fun choruses I've heard in ages and is honestly a contender for my favorite breakup song ever. At number 10, we have Wall of Eyes by The Smile. While I do kinda miss the far greater sense of variety that their debut offered, this record is an improvement on pretty much every other front. The tracklist feels way more consistent, the pacing is pretty much perfect, everything feels very unified in both atmosphere and aesthetic, and the arrangements are generally just so much more lush and open than they were on their debut. It's a very spatially expansive experience, so a little bit of sameness really ain't the end of the world. Some of my favorite tracks include the breathtaking rush of beauty that is Harmonic, the aesthetically fascinating choppy soundscape of I Quit, as well as the 8-minute long Bending Hectic, which balances chill vibes and visceral intensity in such a skillful way. This is the best thing that Thom Yorke has helmed since A Moon-Shaped Pool 8 years prior, and I can't wait to see what's next. Really hoping for a new actual Radiohead album soon, though. Please. At number 9, we have the Frieren Beyond Journey's End score by Evan Call. While this certainly isn't my album of the year, like Daniel Pemberton's work on Across the Spider-Verse back in 2023, I still knew as soon as I finished watching this anime that the score was going to be one of my top favorite musical projects of the year. It also represents a huge step up for Evan Call as a composer. His involvement is actually the very reason I checked this show out in the first place. I'll always subjectively prefer his work on Violet Evergarden, as that show and everything surrounding it mean the world to me, but objectively, his work on Frieren here is a far more impressive achievement. It's obviously more than a little exhausting when all 146 minutes of it are listened to in one sitting, but that doesn't make it any less of an amazing soundtrack. Everything is so beautifully arranged and mixed, there's tons of variety to be found both aesthetically and atmospherically, and it really does make me happy to see Evan improving his craft so much. I adore the grandiose beauty of tracks like Journey of a Lifetime, Great Mage Flamma, and Beyond the Journey's End, and I especially adore the action-driven tracks like Zoltrak, Frieren the Slayer, and Dragon Smasher, but that's really only scratching the surface of all the awesome pieces that exist here. Easily my favorite score of the year, it's stunning. At number 8, we have Passage du Desir by Sturgill Simpson under his new stage name Johnny Blue Skies. This man has had one of the most eclectic musical careers in recent memory. Following a thrilling fusion of country and big band jazz, an alt-rock neo-western with a Netflix anime special, and a throwback bluegrass record that sounded straight out of the 1800s, Sturgill elects to give us his most normal country album in a decade, but I do not mean that as an insult. He's matured so much as an artist throughout all these wild experiments over the years that his return to more straightforward country sounds more beautifully refined than ever. What it may lack in experimentation, it makes up for in sheer quality. I think it's his second best record to date, behind only that aforementioned jazz fusion project. It's consistently emotionally moving while still offering up plenty of fun to be had. The sound palette is so deeply and beautifully lush all throughout, and the highlights are just fantastic. You've got more methodically contemplative moments like If the Sun Never Rises Again and Jupiter's Ferry, or a more tongue-in-cheek jam like Scooter Blues, but the star of the show here is undoubtedly the 9-minute closer, One for the Road. The first 5 minutes make for some incredibly solid country in their own right, but those final 4 minutes essentially sound like if Pink Floyd made country music, and I absolutely love it. It's evocative of Floyd's sense of atmospheric space and grandiose beauty, but with the harmonicas and twangy guitars that make it very identifiably country. Easily one of my top 10 favorite songs of the year. There's truly no one else doing country quite like Sturgill nowadays. His level of class within the genre is unparalleled. Best country project of the year. Can't wait to see what he does next. At number 7, we have All Born Screaming by St. Vincent. This was the April pick from my Spontaneous Discovery initiative, and there is so much to love about it. It's flawlessly produced, never even remotely boring, and it beautifully embodies my single favorite quality to find in pretty much any album. That quality being a deft balance between variety and cohesion. Every single song here feels distinct from one another while always still feeling like they belong together. There's not a single bad song in the bunch, and they're all doing different interesting things. Some of my personal favorites include the incredibly brass-heavy Violent Times, the Nine Inch Nails-esque Broken Man, the absolutely enchanting Sweetest Fruit, as well as the 7-minute long multi-phased title track, but the one song here which truly blows me away is Reckless. The bulk of the track is mostly just pianos and vocals, but then the climax comes crashing in with these violent blasts of distorted synth which make for a truly jaw-dropping display of aesthetic badassery and atmospheric terror. This song is so good that I genuinely laughed the first time I heard it. Laughter of pure enthrallment. Excellent album overall. At number 6, we have Paradise State of Mind by Foster the People. I've waited so long for this. There were 7 whole years between this and their previous full length, and while it may be my personal least favorite of their so far 4 albums, that doesn't mean it's at all disappointing. The fact that only 2 core members now remain in the band is somewhat noticeable within the project's instrumental approach from time to time, and it may contain a higher concentration of slightly mediocre moments when compared to past records, but there is still so much to love here. It's quite aesthetically similar to their previous album, Sacred Hearts Club, but with a completely different sense of atmosphere, very bright and spacious as opposed to Sacred Heart's largely nocturnal vibes, and it also sports the wonderful new addition of strings to their sound palette. There are orchestras all over this thing, and they're always a delight to hear. Highlights for me include the exuberantly fun See You in the Afterlife, the powerfully relaxing Chasing Low Vibrations, the stunningly inspirational title track, the unbelievably smooth Holy Shangri-La, as well as Lost in Space, which honestly executes upon the idea of an interstellar love song far better than anything from that Glass Animals album. Excellent production, a solid evolution of their style, some truly excellent highlights. It's great to see these guys back in action. Here's hoping that LP5 arrives sooner than 2031 though. At number 5, we have Plastic Beach by Glass Death. This was the January pick from my... Hold on. At number 5, we have Plastic Death by Glass Beach. This was the January pick in my Spontaneous Discoveries initiative, as well as the very best album that I found through this method. Guess it's a shame that I peaked so early here, but I'm really not too bothered because this is such a damn good piece of art rock through and through. The only significant issue here is that its main songwriting formula of quiet first half and huge finish starts to feel sort of redundant and leads to the record being a little too long in places. But the atmosphere is consistently and deeply immersive, the aesthetics are nothing short of gorgeous, the vocals are always engaging, the highlights are absolutely brilliant, and I definitely appreciate the moments of variation that are still here. You get everything from acoustic-led ballads to screamo metal. The whole thing also feels very clearly influenced by Radiohead, but it does it in a way that never sounds at all like a ripoff, just interesting inspiration. Highlights for me include Motions, which is easily the most thrilling rock song of the year, the 10-minute epic Comatose, which goes through so many fascinating phases, the wonderfully visceral intensity of Slip Under the Door, as well as the somewhat mind-bending Whale Fall, which feels the most specifically Radiohead inspired out of anything here. I definitely need to try out this band's first album at some point. I really like what they were doing here. At number 4, we have What Now by Brittany Howard. This is such a vividly colorful, deeply soulful, and beautifully varied collection of songs. Easily the best thing that Brittany has come out with over the course of her entire career. It spans an insane variety of genres with everything from rock to pop to soul to electronic to jazz, and even ambient music with all those brief interstitial bits that punctuate the ends of these tracks. Now you'd think that'd make for an extremely messy and disorganized album experience, but it's all held together by some of the most aesthetically inventive and consistently vibrant production I've ever personally heard, as well as such an unbelievably perfect vocal presence all throughout. Brittany Howard really has become one of my all-time favorite female vocalists, right up there with Florence Welch. There are so many amazing songs here. The strikingly passionate Earth Sign, the quietly abstract Samson, absolute bangers like the title track and Prove It To You, frantic thrill rides like Another Day and Power to Undo, and lest we forget the utter showstopper that is Red Flags. If it weren't for a somewhat underwhelming closer, this would honestly have a shot at being even higher. Truly brilliant record regardless. At number 3, we have Clancy by 21 Pilots. While I've undoubtedly enjoyed this album since the very beginning, I was also slightly underwhelmed upon its initial release. That lead single really had me primed for a proper sequel to the greatest album of their discography, Trench. And while the subsequent singles probably should have led me to expect otherwise, I still felt somewhat swindled by the fact this album didn't come across like a direct evolution of Trench and was instead going for something else. As time passed though, and I left my expectations behind, I was much more able to appreciate just how good this record is at achieving what it sets out to do. That goal being to offer up a satisfying blend of everything their last few albums have given us. A track like Next Semester, which feels reminiscent of the songwriting from Vessel. Tracks like Midwest Indigo and At the Risk of Feeling Dumb, which call upon the vibes of Blurryface. Tracks like Overcompensate and Navigating, which beautifully recapture the stunning aesthetics of Trench. Tracks like Backslide or Oldies Station, which remind me of Scaled and Icy's charming simplicity, and even something like Vignette, which genuinely feels like pretty new territory for the band. This mixed bag of influences from past projects, alongside some totally new ideas, really do make Clancy feel like the proper musical culmination of everything the Dima Lore series of albums have been. Consistently beautiful production, tons of variety in both mood and aesthetic while always maintaining cohesion, some of the greatest individual tracks they've ever released. Yeah, this is their second best album to date. Only one it couldn't quite beat out was Trench, but I never really expected it to. At number 2, we have Only God Was Above Us by Vampire Weekend. Their best album by a landslide, in my humble opinion. It truly feels like the full manifestation of their potential that's been slowly brewing ever since their inception. The melodies and overall vibe of this project feel very familiar to what was established by their initial trilogy of albums, but it is in no way simply rehashing those records. Gone is the clean minimalism of that early work, and in its place we're given some genuinely aesthetically aggressive, almost maximalism. My relationship with this band has always been one of loving their unique attitude and songwriting, but being somewhat underwhelmed by their actual soundscapes. Very much not the case with this new album though, because I adore the way it sounds. The manner in which all the instrumentation here is layered and mixed feels almost haphazard and slapdash, but somehow in a good way, like an amazing way. It's like perfectly controlled chaos or something similar. It leads to a very unique soundscape that feels so incredibly dynamic, beautiful, and badass all throughout. In addition to its wonderfully rough production, this is yet another album which strikes that perfect balance between variety and cohesion, is led by some excellent vocal performances that keep you consistently emotionally engaged, and it contains so many awesome highlights. The hypnotic piano pop of Connect, the scuzzy rock energy of Gen X Cops, the exhilarating madness of Ice Cream Piano, the infectiously uplifting atmosphere of Mary Boone, the sheer emotional beauty of Hope. There is so much to love here, such a brilliant album. Anyone who knows me knows that this band has been my primary musical obsession for nearly 2 years now, but I've been a fan for far longer than just that period of time. I first got into them near the end of 2021 when I saw everyone hyping up their debut, Mercurial World. I definitely enjoyed it back then and became obsessed with one song in particular, but I wasn't in love with the record by any means. I then made my way through all their older EPs and singles in the summer of 2022, but it wasn't until the release of Minimix Volume 3 in April 2023 where the Magdalena brainworm truly took its rightful place in my psyche. Throughout all the rest of that year and a decent chunk of 24, I was listening to them nearly every single day. And just as this hyperfixation was starting to become a little less hyper, they announced Imaginal Disk, and the brainworm took hold of me once again. This was easily my most anticipated album of the year, and boy did it deliver. While I ultimately do prefer Mercurial World, this project was no disappointment. My personal tastes may be partial to that first album, but in numerous ways I'd pretty objectively call this an improvement. And to convey my appreciation for the record as best I can, I'm just gonna go over my top 5 favorite songs from it. That's my floor. The star of the show here is very much the guitars, which are easily the grittiest that Mag Bay have ever presented us with. There are tons of fun, even somewhat goofy synths as well, but I seriously cannot get over how totally fucking badass these guitars are. They have a truly unreal amount of swagger in the choruses, and the way they crash in during the climax sends me absolutely wild, especially once they partake in that rivetingly unhinged guitar solo. It should be illegal for songs to be this cool. Watching TV. This is definitely one of the most unique songs on the album. I love the slightly lo-fi texturing on the beat, those fluttery synths which are quite consistently beautiful, as well as Mika's somewhat spoken word vocal performance which lends the song tons of added intrigue. The climax is where this song truly excels though. The vocals and instrumentation both start glitching and lagging in a way that's far cooler than even Tame Impala's Let It Happen. Mika hits an absolutely insane vocal high, and the overall experience here makes for easily one of the most emotionally evocative songs that the band have ever given us. It feels like it's calling you out or something, and it's truly mystifying. It's time to meet the monsters inside you. Death and Romance. What a genuinely unbelievable lead single this was. It presented us with an evolution of their sound that was so instantly enthralling. Here comes this band primarily known for synth pop dropping a thrillingly grandiose new song built mostly out of pianos, real drums, real bass, and an overall pretty minimal amount of synthesizers. And yet it all still feels so perfectly them. It immediately stood out as one of the most stunningly beautiful things they'd ever made without even needing to be synth pop. Every single piece of instrumentation is so aesthetically rich, we're given some of Mika's most passionate vocals to date, and the entire experience of it all sweeps you away like no other song they've ever released. Tunnel Vision. This is handily the most unexpected song in the band's entire catalog up to this point. It's one of the most individually distinct musical blends I've ever heard, period. The first 3 minutes or so aren't immediately attention-grabbing beyond their hypnotically fun vocal layering, but they still serve as incredibly effective build-up for those truly electrifying final 2 minutes, which turn this relatively quaint piece of synth pop into something I'd almost describe as dark prog rock. The pounding drum and bass, the distorted vocal samples, those genuinely unsettling siren synths. It's all just so thrillingly grandiose and intense, and not at all what you'd expect from a quote-unquote synth-pop artist. Cry for me. Every single piece of this soundscape is drop-dead gorgeous right off the bat, but then the song gets sonically shoved through a portal near the halfway point, in a moment calling back to the outro of a previous track, Fear Sex. The song's subsequent second half isn't extremely different from the first, but it's still a cool switch-up on what came before, and it all builds to yet another truly stunning climax. The pianos, the strings, the bass, the synths, the vocals. It's all pure euphoric perfection, and probably my second favorite Mag Bay song to date, behind only Dreamcatching. Absolute masterpiece. I've often credited Mercurial World's excellence to one core idea. That idea being how the band not caring about sounding cool was the very thing which made that record so damn cool. It was such an unabashed, wholehearted embrace of everything that synth pop is, even the stereotypically cornier parts, and that's what made it so badass. By contrast, Imaginal Disk feels to me like the band is actively trying to sound cool now, and damn it if they didn't succeed at creating the coolest record of the year. Their stated goal with this album was to redefine themselves as more of an alternative act as opposed to strictly synthpop, and they absolutely achieved that. They sound so perfectly and authentically themselves here while also introducing so many new elements to their style. A greater focus on organic instrumentation, numerous elements taken distinctly from rock music, a more abstract approach to song structure. It is an incredible expansion of their sound through and through. Barring Love Is Everywhere, which was just okay to me, I could not be happier with the results. But anyways, thanks for watching. I don't really have anything more to say at the end here, just that my next video will be a ranking of every new season of animated TV I watched in 2024. Everything from Star Wars to anime to Smiling Friends, I'll be going over all of it. I've been working on it in tandem with this video, so I've already made some pretty good progress on it, and I hope to have it out in a month's time, although I probably won't.